Whilst away on our recent training camp in Mallorca, it became quite apparent how we all get various data points from our watches on a daily basis or multiple times a day. Obviously, while we're away, we get a chance to compare that and chat to other people about what their watches are telling them. And it became very apparent that some of the information is quite useful, whilst some of it is really quite misleading. I suppose it becomes a bit of a competition as to who can record the lowest body battery or the lowest training readiness score. And obviously, we can compare things like sleep metrics as well. And so this highlighted maybe a need for me to do a very short presentation about where the watch actually gets its data from. So I'm talking mainly, in my experience, from the Garmin platform and use of a Forerunner 965 watch most recently. So what I wanted to go through now is what the watch can measure quite accurately and directly, and what also it tends to use algorithms for. So ultimately what it's guessing. So the issue is that the watch measures very little directly. Most of the outputs, most of the metrics that it uses is actually based on algorithms and estimates and normal population data. But we've got to remember that features do sell watches. And so the more features and the more fancy things it can pretend or even suggest that it measures quite accurately, then more likely the Garmin will sell more watches. We all now tend to demand more insight and quantification of what's going on in our lives. We want to measure sleep, we want to measure recovery, we want to measure fitness and other parameters as well. And the more that there's demand for that, then the people who make the watches are going to, cater to that. But the more algorithms are used and the more estimation is used, then the errors can stack upon each other. So we can trust mostly in what it measures directly and a little less so in what it estimates from other data points. So here's a list of what your watch can actually measure. So we know that they have an optical heart rate sensor in the back of them, and that rests against your wrist and can measure blood flow. We know that, therefore, if it can measure heart rate, it can measure the variability of each beat to beat. So it can measure HRV. Within the watch is an accelerometer and a gyroscope, which tells the watch how and where it's moving in space, and therefore it can measure movement of the arm particularly, but by then inference, it can measure what your body is doing generally. It's obviously got GPS capability, so it can measure speed and distance, and it has an internal clock, so it can measure time as well. Most models, again, the models that I'm talking about, also measure elevation with use of an altimeter. This is something that can be a little bit temperamental and often goes wrong when you've had a watch for quite a while. And then some of the top end models also can measure the amount of oxygen in your blood with another device that can be incorporated into the back of the watch, and skin temperature as well. But we know that even those raw data points, those things that the watch can actually measure, can be influenced by various other factors like fatigue and hydration. We know, that's particularly as far as heart rate is concerned. We know that GPS can be problematic, and also it's smooth, and then we have dropouts of it. It can be difficult when it's a cloudy day or when we're running or swimming in very tight circumstances, or there's trees and buildings around. HRV is highly sensitive. The HRV figures are based on this optical heart rate reading, which certainly at rest might be a little bit more accurate. Once you're exercising, it tends to reduce in its accuracy. If you're using the watch in combination with an electrical heart rate sensor, which is a chest strap, then you can probably trust the results more appropriately. But again, HRV tends to be measured at rest and whilst asleep, and very few of us are going to bother wearing a chest strap for that. And again, the movement of your wrist, the gyroscope and the accelerometer, they lack like context. Your watch is going to predict what you're doing, but it doesn't really know what you're doing. Everything else that it has at its disposal is a modeled data point. It's based on assumptions and population averages. So obviously Garmin has access to a lot of data points. And if you fit well within that normal distribution curve, then you should be okay. But there will be areas of your physiology where you perhaps don't quite fit within that. So everything else is based on algorithms. So if we start with a few examples, if we think about the running metrics that we get, they're derived but not direct. So the inputs, we've obviously got the accelerometer and the gyroscope measuring movement at the wrist, and therefore ground contact time can be estimated from that accelerometer. We've got the GPS data, we've got the speed and the pace, so that's all fine. So they're the things that can be measured. But the things that the watch then tells you, such as your cadence, your stride length, the length of time that each foot is on the floor, these sorts of things, they're all estimated from a combination of those data points. So yes, they're likely to be very accurate, but whether they're perfectly accurate is difficult to say, and probably should be used again to look at in terms of trends and an overview, rather than looking for specific data points and specific numbers. So for instance, if the watch is telling you your cadence is improving, it's getting a little bit higher, or your ground contact time is reducing, then it probably is. But whether the number of milliseconds that it's reduced by is accurate is very difficult to say. One of the most common things that I think certainly novices and the general public will see displayed on the watch is VO2 max. Now, we obviously know that to measure VO2 max accurately, you need to do it in a laboratory and look at the gas exchange. So you'll be breathing into a mask, and the gas is collected while you do some form of ramp test. Now, what the watch does is the watch measures your heart rate during your training sessions. It measures your speed and pace directly as well. It will also combine that with some personal data that you've entered in your settings. So things like your gender, your body weight, and those sorts of things. And then it will put those together to estimate your VO2 max. Now, again, if this is trending in the right direction and it's telling you you're getting fitter, you probably are. But whether the number displayed on the screen is accurate, and again, from experience, we know it's highly, highly variable. It could well be at least 5 points, if not close to 10 points off from what a gas exchange test in the laboratory would show. So again, use it as an overview, but don't hold the values and its judgment over you with any great strength of conviction. Just be a little bit open to the fact that it's probably not wholly accurate. When we look at the sleep scores, again, sleep score is kind of made up from various things that the watch can measure. Again, here, the gold standard test for measuring your sleep and the quality of your sleep would be an EEG study. So you'd be in a sleep laboratory in a hospital or a clinic. Somebody would be observing your sleep, and you would also have some electrodes placed on your head to measure the brain waves. Now, obviously, the watch can't do that. But what it can do is measure the movement at your wrist again. It can also take your heart rate and your HRV. And from the combination of those three things, it can use algorithms to estimate what stage of sleep you're in, and the overall quality of your sleep throughout the night. How long does it estimate you're actually asleep for? What stages of sleep and how long were those stages, and were they complete? And then it will come up with a sleep score number out of 100. But again, that is a totally made up kind of score. And the way that Garmin do it versus Whoop or Oura Ring, they're all going to be slightly different. So again, measuring some things to then estimate an output and estimate the quality and quantity of your sleep. Things like body battery, I suppose this is where things start to get a little bit more difficult to interpret. We've got that HRV again. So body battery includes the HRV measurement, the heart rate measurement, and the activity that you've recorded on your watch, whether that's exercise or just steps and just general movement of the wrist. It will then use that estimated sleep score. So it's now going to use a score that's already estimated alongside 2 or 3 other directly measured variables. And then it's going to come up with this score as a body battery. And this is just the amount of input to charge the battery. So the sleep and the resting time and things, and the HRV and the heart rate. And then it's going to also minus off that your expended energy and the amount of exercise that you've been doing. Training readiness is where it gets even more difficult, because now we've got a score that's based on estimates only. So we've got like a third level of data now. We've not any longer got any directly measured variables here. So we've got sleep score, which is included, which is estimated. We've got HRV status, which is estimated. We've got recovery time, which is estimated, and we've got the acute load of your training, which again is estimated. So this training readiness score that we often see displayed on our watch is about how ready you would be to take on a difficult training day, or maybe you should try a moderate training day, or maybe you need a day off. This is purely based on estimates. And so again, this is a score that I wouldn't put much faith in. And that's quite lucky, because again, on training camp, we see people training day after day with scores less than 20, because they're experiencing quite a high training load compared to the normal training, which certainly, tells us that they're under more stress and strain. But we're also in a situation where we want to be training on training camp. The weather is nicer. We've got no other demands. We're not trying to work at the same time. So we need to bear all that in mind. And then we've got training status, which again, you'll see is your training productive or not. And again, this is purely based on a lot of estimates. So this particular metric uses VO2 max, which is estimated, training load, which is estimated, and heart rate response. So that's how your heart responds to the effort level, the speed or the pace, the power that you're recording at the time. And it gives us this idea of whether we're training productively or not. And again, it's a decent overview. The concept is good. The theory works, but whether we can hold that to any great high power over how we train is very difficult to say. And I certainly wouldn't do. And something that I've noticed recently is one called Endurance Score, which I haven't displayed on my watch previously, but I came across it. So I've started to look at that. Now, again, this is a combination of measured and estimated things. We've got your training history. So how many training sessions you've been logging, and particularly a bias is the long duration efforts, because it is an endurance score after all. And it looks at that heart rate response again to exercise. And it comes up with a number that's typically in the thousands. And it's like a measure of how well endurance trained you are. So obviously, if that's trending upwards, I think that's all you need to know. You are getting more fatigue resistant, perhaps more fitter, doing more hours and more gaining more stress and more load from your training. But what that actual number is in the thousands probably matters much less, as long as the line is trending upwards. And so I think what it's important to just sort of finish with is thinking about where errors occur. So we've got initial measurement error. So even the things that it can measure, like heart rate, are open to error. I'm sure we've all seen that in runs and bike rides where the heart rate just goes off for a while. It's very difficult to measure heart rate from an optical sensor while you're moving, because it relies on detecting the blood flow. As the pulse of blood passes through the vein near the skin, it's trying to detect that wave of blood flow. And if it catches one pulse early and one late and one in the middle, your heart rate's going to vary a little bit, even though it may not be varying very much at all. Now, that could upset the HRV reading quite easily. So again, that's just one example. The context matters, obviously. If you're on training camp, you would interpret things differently. If you're in the heat, if you're fatigued or stressed at work, all of the context that we know and really forms part of good coaching is not part of what the watch is using. It's using very simple algorithms based on the data that it can assess and then predict. And then most of the data points that use algorithms are based on normal distribution curves. So Garmin has access to thousands, if not millions, of data points. It will keep uploading and using those to develop what should be normal ranges for various scores. And as I say, sometimes that will work very well, and sometimes it just won't when it's looking at interpreting your data. So the errors can occur at any stage. Now, if it's something like heart rate that's measured from the watch, the errors are likely to be less. Once we get through to the estimates and the algorithms and the very heavily estimated features, then there are likely to be more and more errors in the calculations. So the key message really is, yes, keep abreast of these metrics, use it as a something that's interesting and to compare and to keep an overview of. Look at the trends rather than the actual values, and don't be worried too much about the exact numbers, but look at trends. And above all else, still continue to trust yourself and how you feel and what your coach is telling you and the quality of the training that you're doing, rather than trusting the watch. If the watch helps to back up how you're feeling, that's great, but don't sort of trust the watch over how you feel internally yourself. And the takeaway really is just remember that these watches do only measure a few things directly, and everything else is based on, the clever scientists who have made algorithms and allowed the watch then to predict other metrics. Now, that might be in order to sell watches. It might be because there's demand for it from people wanting to know these things. But just remember that can cause more confusion and lead you to make conclusions and assumptions that aren't wholly true. And I would say generally, if the watch measures it directly, you can probably trust the data more strongly, more confidently. So heart rate, GPS for pace, the time of day. You would trust the time of day on the watch most of the time. So if it measures it directly, then trust it quite highly. If it's a second order kind of calculation, so there's a few measurements gone into predicting something, that's again a little bit less likely to be accurate, little more chance of error. But if it goes to the third order, where it's estimates, producing further estimates, we have to be very cautious at that stage. So that's it. That's an overview of what your watch can measure and what it predicts. Hope that's helpful just to help guide you in how you use your watch and understanding it. Any questions, you can pop them over to me.